Shoot a bullseye, 50 times, I'll marry you. Mafia boss. Mocked the poor girl. What happened next? Shocked. A ruthless mafia boss laughs at a broke club worker with a bow, then dares her, hit 50 bullseyes in a row and win your freedom, miss once, and belong to him. Cameras roll, crowds scream, and the poor girl locks her breath, arrow after arrow, as the boss watches like a hunter who just found his weakness. But the moment she wins, a darker game begins. Her brother is grabbed, a convoy races through neon streets, and the same boss who mocked her becomes the only shield she has. A forged contract appears. A hidden traitor inside his family moves pieces in the dark. A black-tie truce hides a bomb. And on a rooftop in the rain, the final shot is not about a target, it's about trust. If the prize is marriage and the cost is blood, who's really pulling the strings? And when the last arrow flies, will the girl choose the man who once mocked her, or the freedom she fought to earn? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Callah's fingers moved mechanically through the stack of $1 bills. 8 years of teaching rich wannabes how to shoot, and her tips barely covered the month's groceries. The dented jar sat accusingly on the counter, its meager contents spread before her like a sad confession. 112, she muttered, rubber banding the bills together. Not enough. Never enough. The heavy metal door crashed open, letting in a blast of harbor wind and loud voices. Callah's hand instinctively moved toward the gun beneath the counter, but froze when she saw who entered. 5 men in tailored suits filled the shabby lobby, their polished shoes incongruous against the scuffed linoleum. Behind them stood Kellen Voss, his presence commanding even in the harsh overhead lighting. The Voss syndicate owned half of East Harbor, but they'd never darkened her door before. "So this is where the famous trick shooter practices," Kellen drawled, his gaze sweeping the worn-down range with obvious disdain. "Looks more like a carnival attraction than a proper club," his entourage laughed on cue. Callah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice neutral. "We're closed." "I heard you can hit 50 targets blind," Kellen continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "That you never miss." He turned to his men, lips curving. "What do you think, boys? Should we test the poor girl's carnival tricks?" More laughter. Phones appeared, recording. Callah's phone vibrated in her pocket. Probably Jonah, with more bad news about bills she couldn't pay. Her mother's hospital fees loomed largest, a mountain of debt that grew steeper every month. "I don't perform on command," she said flatly. Kellen's smile sharpened. "What if I made it worth your while?" He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. "Your mother's medical debt, your brother's student loans, that cramped apartment you can barely afford." His eyes met hers. "I could make it all disappear." Callah's heart hammered, but she kept her expression blank. "And what do you want in return?" "A simple wager, 50 consecutive bullseyes, my rules." He paused. "Win, and I clear every debt. I'll even throw in the deed to your apartment." His gaze traveled slowly down her body. "Miss once, and you belong to me for a month." The room went quiet. Callah's phone buzzed again, Jonah's text appearing on screen. "Final notice from landlord. Pinned to door. Call me." She looked up to find Kellen watching her, his eyes calculating despite his casual pose. He was taking her measure, analyzing her stance, her grip, the way she held herself. His scrutiny only fed the rage simmering beneath her skin. "When?" she asked. "End of the week. We'll make it official." He gestured to one of his men, who produced legal documents with suspicious speed. "Everything in writing, witnessed and notarized right here." The bar became an impromptu office, phones recording as Callah read through the contract. Her future balanced on the edge of a bullet, but her hand remained steady as she signed. "Smart girl," Kellen murmured, tucking the papers away. "We'll see if you're as good as they say." The group filed out, leaving behind the smell of expensive cologne and the weight of what she'd just agreed to. Callah mechanically finished closing, her mind already mapping out training schedules. She'd need every minute between now and the challenge. At midnight, she killed the interior lights. The neon open sign cast a red glow through the front windows, illuminating the empty street, almost empty. A black SUV idled across the way, its engine a low purr in the night air. As she secured the final lock, a man stepped into the cone of lamplight. Broad-shouldered, military bearing. He pulled out a phone and spoke quietly into it, his presence more statement than threat. Callah recognized him from Kellen's group. Bram, the one who'd stayed silent through the whole exchange. Their eyes met briefly through the glass. He gave a slight nod, then returned to his call. She waited until he finished, then turned the deadbolt back. No time for sleep tonight. The target cartwheels squeaked as she pushed it onto lane 3, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar motions. The weight of her competition pistol settled into her palm like coming home. She had 5 days to make impossible look easy, 5 days to save her family or lose her freedom. The first target clicked into place. Calla squared her stance, sighting down the barrel. She'd learned to shoot in this rundown range, turned herself into the best because second best didn't pay the bills. Now everything rode on that hard-won skill. She thought of her mother in the hospital bed, of Jonah trying to balance school with part-time work, of Kellen's smirking certainty that she'd fail. The rage that had been simmering all night crystallized into cold focus. 50 perfect shots. No room for error. The challenge seemed impossible, but impossible was where Calla lived. She'd built her reputation on making the impossible look easy, on turning desperation into precision. The range lights hummed to life, harsh fluorescence replacing the neon glow. Dawn was hours away, but Calla wouldn't waste a minute. She had a point to prove and a family to protect. She raised her pistol, found her center, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the empty range, a perfect bullseye. 1 down, thousands more to practice. Across the street, the black SUV remained, its silent guardian a reminder of the stakes. But Calla had stopped noticing. Her world had narrowed to the target, the gun, and the relentless drive to win. The HVAC's death rattle provided a steady backbeat as Calla worked through her breath ladder exercises. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, release for 4, again longer this time. Her shoulder burned from repetition, but she pushed through, knowing endurance would make or break her when it mattered. The range's ancient clock ticked to 3:10 a.m. She lowered her bow, rolling her neck to ease the tension. That's when she spotted it, a pristine pack of carbon arrows, on the counter. Her initials burned into the shaft ends with precise care. They hadn't been there an hour ago. Calla ran her fingers over the markings, conflict churning in her gut. Pride screamed to leave them untouched. She didn't need handouts, especially not from Kellen's crew. But survival whispered louder. Her own arrows were warped from overuse, their fletchings ragged. These would fly true. "Damn it," she muttered, gathering her old arrows and returning them to storage. The new ones felt perfectly weighted in her hand. The door chimed, and Bram's bulk filled the frame. He carried a large thermos, his expression neutral as he settled into a chair by the entrance. "Making sure no one tampers with the lanes," he said simply, unscrewing the cap to release coffee's bitter steam. Calla nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She pulled up a metronome app on her phone, setting it to match her target heart rate. The steady tick became her world as she knocked, drew, released. Again. Again. Her fingers found their rhythm. Inhale with the draw, hold at anchor point, release on the exhale. The new arrows sang through the air, grouping tighter than she'd managed all week. When fatigue made her arms shake, she switched to form drills without drawing, drilling the motion into muscle memory. Dawn crept in through grimy windows. Bram remained a silent sentinel, occasionally stepping out to scan the street before returning to his post. Calla gathered her gear as the sun cleared the horizon, body aching but mind sharp. Home was a blur of activity, rousing Jonah for his coffee shop shift, video calling their mother to check her morning vitals, choking down protein bars while reviewing shooting forms on her phone. She caught 3 hours of sleep before her shift at the range, then started the cycle again. As evening fell, the pattern repeated for 4 nights. Each session brought small changes to the range. The flickering backlight suddenly worked perfectly, eliminating target shadows. A new bowstring appeared, perfectly waxed and silenced. Calla accepted these gifts with grudging gratitude, channeling her pride into perfecting her form instead. Bram's presence became familiar, his silence comfortable rather than threatening. He never offered advice or criticism, just maintained his watchful position while she drilled. Sometimes she caught him studying her technique with professional interest, but he kept his observations to himself. Jonah stopped by on the 3rd night, worry etched on his face. "You're pushing too hard," he said, watching her blistered fingers work the string. "I'm pushing exactly hard enough," she corrected, adjusting her knocking point for the 100th time. "How's Mom?" "Same. The nurses say she's stable." He hesitated. "Calla, if this goes wrong, it won't." She met his eyes, letting him see her certainty. "I've got this, little brother. Trust me." Thursday night found her alone in the range, every light burning clean and bright. Her muscles had moved past fatigue into a strange clarity, each motion precise and automatic. The new arrows waited in their quiver like soldiers at attention. "Inhale, anchor, loose," she whispered to the empty room. The arrow hit dead center, as she knew it would. Her form had become a prayer, repeated thousands of times until it was more natural than breathing. Beyond the windows, another SUV had replaced Bram's, the syndicate's rotating guard, ensuring no one gained after-hours access to practice. Calla didn't care. She had transcended practice, moving into the space where technique became instinct. She thought of her mother's hospital bills, of Jonah's student loans crushing his dreams, of their apartment, shabby but home, hanging by a thread. Tomorrow would decide everything, but fear had no place in her preparations. Her phone buzzed. Jonah sending a good luck text, their mother's nurse sharing evening vitals, the landlord demanding updates. Calla let them wait. Right now, her world was the perfect triangle of archer, bow, and target. The clock crawled toward midnight. Her fingers found the string again, calluses having replaced blisters. Draw, anchor, release. The arrow split air with surgical precision, joining its brothers in the target's heart. Through the windows, she could see the city's glow painting the clouds. Somewhere out there, viewers were already placing bets on tomorrow's outcome. LED boards were being tested, camera equipment calibrated. In less than 24 hours, the range would transform into an arena. Calla packed her gear with practiced efficiency, each item in its place. Her body moved through the familiar motions of cleanup, while her mind remained in that crystalline space of perfect focus. 4 nights of relentless training had stripped away everything but the essential, the shot, the breath, the unwavering certainty of her aim. The night guard nodded as she left, his eyes respectful rather than predatory. Word had spread about her dedication, earning reluctant admiration even from Kellen's crew. She'd proven she wasn't just a carnival trick shooter taking on a foolish bet. Tomorrow would bring crowds and cameras, pressure, and consequences. But tonight, in the quiet hours she'd claimed as her own, Calla had found something beyond mere practice. She'd found the place where determination became destiny, where every arrow flew true because there was no other option. The shooting range transformed into a gladiator arena. Phone lights pierced the dimness like fireflies, their glow reflecting off the polished floor. A livestream host with 2 white teeth prowled the edges, her saccharine voice narrating for thousands of invisible viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the stakes couldn't be higher." She gestured dramatically toward Calla, who stood quietly checking her bow. "1 shooter, 50 shots, no room for error." Kellen Voss commanded the space with lazy authority, his designer suit worth more than the club's monthly revenue. He lifted a manicured hand, silencing the murmurs. "Let's review the terms." His voice carried the precise chill of winter rain. 1 lane, using the club's equipment. My spotter validates each shot. He nodded to a stern-faced man with military bearing. "Miss once, and you're mine for 30 days. Hit all 50, you get the deed, and we clear your debts." Calla's fingers traced the familiar grip of her bow, ignoring how Kellen's men had spent nights watching her practice. Their presence had been a constant shadow, yet their boss acted as if he hadn't orchestrated every minute of surveillance. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised high. Someone started a betting pool in the back. The live stream counter ticked past 10,000 viewers. Calla took her position, muscle memory from countless repetitions guiding her stance. The first arrow slid from the quiver like a whisper. Inhale, draw, anchor, release, thunk, dead center. 9 more arrows followed in precise succession, each finding home in the red. The room fell silent except for the soft percussion of arrows striking true. Even the livestream host lowered her voice to a reverent hush. 20 shots. 30. The rhythm became a meditation. Calla existed in the space between heartbeats, where nothing mattered except the next perfect release. She felt Kellen's presence like a weight, his steady breathing across the room marking time. At 34, her fingers trembled. A microscopic doubt, barely visible, but enough to send a shiver through her release hand. The arrow was already in motion, its path threatening to betray her. Kellen's measured breathing caught her attention. As much as she hated it, his calm became an anchor. She matched her rhythm to his, letting his controlled patience steady her own. 35 struck. True. 36 followed. The target face disappeared under a tight constellation of arrows, each finding its place in the growing cloverleaf pattern. 40. 45. The livestream counter passed 50,000. Someone in the crowd was praying in whispers. Others stood motionless, phones forgotten in their hands. 49 buried itself perfectly, indistinguishable from its brothers. One shot remained between Calla and freedom. She reached for the final arrow. The floor creaked as spectators leaned forward. The livestream host held her breath mid-sentence. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Calla found her anchor point. The world narrowed to the perfect triangle of archer, bow, and target. She released. The arrow flew true, striking dead center with a decisive thunk. Sound exploded back into the room. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Phones flashed like strobe lights. The livestream host was shouting statistics and reaction counts. Kellen raised 2 fingers, and silence fell again. His expression held something new. Not quite smile, not quite frown, but a recognition that pulled at the corner of his mouth. He beckoned to a woman in a charcoal suit. "The notary will witness," he announced. "Bring the documents." The notary approached with 2 folders, one holding the deed to Calla's apartment, the other containing loan discharge papers. Each page required signatures, initials, witnesses. Kellen's pen moved with efficient strokes, making it official. Cameras continued flashing as Calla clutched the folders to her chest. The crowd surged forward, everyone wanting to touch a piece of the moment. Questions flew like arrows. How did you train? Did you ever doubt? What's next for the shooting star? The livestream host tried to wedge through for an exclusive. Betting winners celebrated, while losers argued over slow-motion replays. Someone started a chant of Calla's name. She stood in the center of the chaos, folders pressed against her racing heart. The papers inside represented more than property and debt. They were freedom, security, a future where her family could breathe easier. Kellen's voice cut through the noise. "Make way!" The crowd parted instantly. He paused near Calla, close enough that only she could hear. Impressive work. Then he was gone, his entourage flowing around him like water. The celebration continued. Phones captured every angle. The livestream host summarized the evening's drama for her audience. Regular club members who'd known Calla for years pressed forward with congratulations. She smiled and nodded, answered questions on autopilot, posed for photos when asked, but her mind was already racing ahead to sharing the news with Jonah and their mother. No more threatening letters, no more choosing between medication and rent. The crowd gradually thinned as the initial excitement faded. Calla's arms ached from holding the bow, her fingers tender from 50 perfect releases. She began working her way toward the back corridor where she could finally breathe and process everything that had happened. The envelope hit the floor like a death sentence. Calla's hands shook as she stared at the photos spread before her. Jonah slumped in a metal chair, zip ties cutting into his wrists. Each image bore tonight's timestamp in stark digital numbers. Her fingers traced the block letters of the note. Ride with Kellen. Follow instructions, or the boy dies. Blood roared in her ears as she snatched up the evidence. The main room's celebratory noise became distant, meaningless. She shouldered through the crowd, photos clutched like weapons. Kellen stood near the entrance, issuing quiet orders to his men. "You bastard!" Calla hissed, shoving the photos against his chest. "Is this how you handle losing? Kidnap my brother because I beat your game?" But Kellen's usual smirk vanished, replaced by something cold and focused. Without a word, he held up his phone. The same message glowed on his screen, along with a pulsing red dot on a map. "We received this 5 minutes ago," he said, voice stripped of its earlier showmanship. "Someone's using your brother to play both sides." Calla's anger faltered. The calculation in Kellen's eyes wasn't satisfaction. It was the look of a predator whose territory had been invaded. She glanced toward the exit, but camera phones still flashed through the windows. Local police would take forever to respond, and they'd never move faster than the syndicate's reach. "Clock's ticking," Kellen said softly. "My convoy or your brother's life. Choose." The victory folders crackled in her grip. All that careful planning, all those perfect shots. And now the freedom they'd bought felt like a cruel joke. But Jonah's face in those photos left no room for hesitation. "Fine," she spat. "But this doesn't make us even." Kellen's hand settled between her shoulder blades, guiding her toward the back exit where 3 black SUVs idled. The touch wasn't possessive, it was tactical, keeping her moving while his men formed a barrier against prying eyes. The medic, a severe-looking woman with close-cropped hair, held the door as Calla climbed into the middle vehicle. The leather seat was cool against her arms as she slid across, the interior smelling of gun oil and expensive cologne. Kellen followed, sitting opposite while Bram took the wheel. "All units, convoy formation," Kellen commanded into a sleek headset. "Target location receiving, maintain distance protocols." His voice had shed all trace of the showman, revealing the steel beneath. The SUV purred to life, falling into smooth formation with its escorts. Through tinted windows, the city became a blur of neon and shadow. Digital billboards flashed past like fever dreams. Calla sat rigid, hands clenched around the folders that had seemed so important just minutes ago. The medic watched her with quiet assessment, probably looking for signs of shock. But Calla's mind was already racing. Ahead, mapping angles and exits just like she did with target lanes. The tracker signal meant they had a destination. Every second brought them closer to Jonah. Kellen's fingers danced across a tablet, coordinating with other teams through encrypted channels. Status updates crackled through the convoy's comm system in clipped phrases. Perimeter secure. Second team in position. Drone feed establishing. They merged onto the expressway, the escort vehicles maintaining precise spacing. No one spoke inside the SUV. The only sounds were the hushed engine and the subtle clicks of Kellen's tablet. Calla watched his reflection in the window, noting how his public persona had vanished completely. This was the real Kellen Voss, the one who built and held an empire. The city's glittering skyline loomed closer, dominated by the stark silhouette of Voss Tower. Its upper floors gleamed like a sword pointing at the stars. The convoy peeled off the main road, descending a private ramp that curved beneath the building's foundations. Calla's stomach dropped as they spiraled deeper underground. The folders in her lap, her hard-won prize, suddenly felt like paper chains binding her to whatever game had just begun. The perfect shots that had bought her freedom now seemed to echo with cruel irony. She'd hit every target except the one that mattered most, keeping Jonah safe. Security barriers parted silently as they approached. The SUV glided to a stop in a pristine underground garage, flanked by armed personnel in tactical gear. Bram was already moving, checking angles and signaling all clear. The medic opened Calla's door with practiced efficiency. Penthouse Command Center, Kellen stated, not a request but a vector. Bram, secure our route. Diana, stay with our guest. The elevator waited like a steel coffin, its polished doors reflecting Calla's taut expression. As they rose through the tower's armored core, she felt the weight of every floor adding to the pressure in her chest. The folders crinkled in her white-knuckled grip, a reminder that victory and defeat sometimes wore the same face. The elevator opened directly into Kellen's command center. Screens flickered to life along the walls, painting the space in cold digital light. Bram moved immediately to a central console, fingers flying across keyboards as he patched in security feeds. Grainy warehouse footage began populating the main display. Dark figures moved through industrial shadows. Somewhere in those pixelated frames, Jonah waited. Calla stepped closer to the screens, searching for any detail that might tell her where her brother was being held. The victory that had tasted so sweet an hour ago now turned to ashes in her mouth. She'd played Kellen's game perfectly, only to find herself in a deadlier contest with unknown rules and her brother's life as the stake. Kellen's command center transformed into a war room within minutes. Screens flickered with surveillance feeds while his fingers flew across multiple tablets, coordinating teams with surgical precision. His voice carried authority without volume, each order clear and measured. Team 2, establish perimeter. Team 3, ready for breach on my mark. Air support standing by for thermal imaging. Calla stood rigid by the main display, watching the organized chaos unfold. Her hands still clutched the folders, hollow victory turning to lead in her stomach. Kellen paused his rapid-fire commands and turned to her, his expression shifting to something unexpectedly gentle. Sit. He gestured to a leather chair. When she didn't move, he sighed and crossed to a hidden panel. At least drink something. He retrieved a bottle of water and protein bar, setting them on the console beside her. I don't need, she started. You're dehydrated from 4 hours of shooting. Your hands are shaking. He pressed a keycard into her palm. This gives you access to this floor. Use it or don't. But understand this. You will not leave my sight until we have Jonah. Anger flared hot in her chest. This whole thing was a setup, wasn't it? The wager, the spectacle, just another way to put a leash on me. The wager served two purposes, he admitted, meeting her glare. Yes, I needed your skills. But more importantly, I needed a public event at your club. We've known for weeks someone was using it as a dead drop location. Tonight forced them to move. She absorbed this, fury warring with the tactical logic. So you used me as bait. I used the situation. The debt was real. The competition was real. Your victory was earned. He held her gaze. But yes, I knew it would force our traitor's hand. Before she could respond, Bram's voice cut through the tension. Sir, live feed, southeast quadrant. They turned to the main screen where grainy footage showed a familiar figure chained to a support beam. Jonah's head hung forward, but his chest moved with steady breaths. Armed men in leather jackets paced the warehouse floor, Korshak gang patches visible on their shoulders. Kellen was already moving, strapping on a tactical vest. Bram, gear up. Diana, prep medical. All teams, converge on target location. Bram appeared at Kala's side, pressing a compact radio into her hands. Channel 3, emergency frequency if you need extraction. His usually stoic expression held a hint of reassurance. She nodded, fingers finding the familiar comfort of her bow case, where it leaned against the console. The grip felt more solid than any promises or plans. "You're bringing that?" Kellen asked, checking his sidearm. "You've seen what I can do with it." Her voice was steel. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That I have. Move out." The descent to the garage was swift and silent. Armed personnel filled 3 tactical vans, weapons checked and rechecked. Kala found herself in the lead vehicle between Bram and a wall of monitoring equipment. Kellen sat opposite, coordinating final positions through his headset. City streets blurred past as they wound through industrial districts. Kala's fingers traced the curve of her bow, finding center in the familiar texture. The radio sat heavy in her pocket, a lifeline she hoped not to need. Bram's hand signals guided them through the final approach. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Teams melted into position around the perimeter while their van tucked into a loading bay alcove. "Stay with Bram," Kellen ordered, his voice pitched low. "When we clear the main floor, we'll signal." He caught her arm as she moved to exit. "Kala, we get one shot at this. Don't do anything stupid." She met his gaze. "Just get my brother out." The strike team ghosted through a rusted side entrance, weapons ready. Kala and Bram took cover behind a stack of pallets in the alley, watching shadows move past high windows. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady on the bow. Through the radio, she heard measured breathing and soft footfalls. Tactical lights swept the warehouse interior in controlled patterns. A voice murmured coordinates. Another reported positions. Jonah was in there, close enough to save, far enough to lose in an instant if something went wrong. Kala pressed her back against the pallets, feeling splinters through her shirt. The night air carried hints of rust and diesel, every sense strained for signals. A shout, a shot, anything to tell her what was happening inside. Bram crouched beside her, rifle ready, but his attention split between the entrance and her. She recognized the look. He'd been assigned to contain her as much as protect her. The thought should have stung, but she felt only cold focus. The radio crackled with movement updates, teams converging, targets identified. The warehouse held its breath, a pressure building like the moment before lightning strikes. Kala knocked an arrow, drawing comfort from the familiar motion. Above them, moonlight caught the edges of a catwalk, its ladder a skeletal shadow against the wall. Her gaze traced possible paths, mapping angles like she had in the shooting lanes. Different stakes, same principles. The night stretched like a bowstring at full draw, waiting, watching, until a gunshot cracked the silence. Then another. The sound ricocheted off metal and concrete. Kala was moving before conscious thought, her body already angled toward the catwalk ladder. Bram's hand shot out, his whisper, "Don't!" falling away behind her as she sprinted for higher ground. The smoke drifted like ghostly fingers through the rafters as Kala inched forward on her belly, the metal catwalk cool against her skin. Below, chaos erupted in bursts of gunfire and shouted commands. Her fingers found an arrow, knocking it with practiced silence. Through the haze, she picked out her first target, a fluorescent light fixture casting harsh shadows over Kellen's advancing team. The arrow whispered through the air. Glass tinkled, plunging that section into darkness. In the confusion, she spotted a Korshak grunt raising his weapon toward Bram's position. Her second shot struck true, sending the gun spinning across the concrete floor. Kellen's men adapted to her intervention with fluid grace, as if they'd trained for this exact scenario. Each arrow she loosed became a signal, a deadly metronome directing their dance through the warehouse. When she took out lights, they surged forward. When she disarmed threats, they secured new positions. Her breath settled into the familiar rhythm. Inhale, anchor, loose. The same pattern that had won her freedom now bought precious seconds for the strike team. Through her scope, she watched Kellen's steady advance toward the support beam, where Jonah slumped. Her brother's face was bruised, but his chest rose and fell steadily. A flash of movement caught her eye. 3 more Korshak soldiers, emerging from behind shipping crates. She dropped another light, forcing them to pause and adjust their night vision. The delay was enough for Kellen's team to dispatch 2 of them. Kellen reached Jonah, bolt cutters appearing in his hands. The chains fell away with 2 sharp snaps. But as he helped Jonah to his feet, a voice cut through the chaos. "Drop the bow, sweetheart." 3 red laser dots danced across Kala's chest. The Korshak lieutenant had spotted her position, his men's weapons trained with unwavering precision. Her muscles froze, mind racing through options that all ended in failure. Then Kellen stepped into the open, drawing their attention. "Looking for me?" His voice carried a lethal edge that made even his own men tense. The red dots swiveled to track his movement, giving Kala the opening she needed. 2 heartbeats. That's all she had. Her arrow found the fire alarm's glass panel, setting off a cascade of sound and strobing light. The warehouse erupted in pulsing chaos, the sudden sensory assault throwing off the Korshak soldiers' aim. Their shots went wide, pinging off metal supports as Kala sprinted along the catwalk. Below, Kellen half-carried Jonah toward the exit while his team laid down covering fire. Bram appeared at their flank, his rifle barking short, controlled bursts that kept the enemy pinned. The strobing emergency lights turned everything into a broken film reel. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. Kala reached the ladder and slid down, her boots hitting concrete as Kellen's voice cut through the din. "Move!" The command galvanized everyone into action. They pushed through the side entrance in a coordinated surge, bullets whining off the doorframe. The alley air hit her lungs like ice. Hands grabbed her shoulders, shoving her toward the waiting van. She stumbled inside after Jonah, Kellen right behind them. The doors slammed shut as their driver gunned the engine. Her hands shook violently as she tried to unclip her quiver, fingers refusing to cooperate. The adrenaline crash hit hard, making everything feel distant and unreal. Then Kellen's hands covered hers, steady and warm. "You did that," he said softly, helping her with the straps. His touch anchored her to the present, to the reality that they'd succeeded, that Jonah was alive. She looked at her brother, slumped against the van's wall with Diana checking his vitals. His eyes were open, tracking her movement. "Kala," he croaked. "That was some shooting." "Save your strength," she managed, but relief made her voice crack. Bram passed her a bottle of water from the tactical supplies. "The fire alarm was inspired," he said, respect evident in his tone. "Created the perfect distraction without risking structural damage." Kellen hadn't moved away, his shoulder pressed against hers as the van wove through back streets. His presence felt different now, less threatening, more protective. She should have pulled away, maintained distance. Instead, she found herself leaning into that solid warmth. "Your brother needs medical attention," Diana reported, "but nothing critical. Dehydration, superficial bruising, mild concussion from the initial capture." Kala nodded, struggling to process. The folders with their hard-won freedom sat in her backpack at the penthouse, suddenly meaningless compared to Jonah's safety. She'd walked into Kellen's world, thinking it was a trap, only to find herself integrated into his operation, like she'd trained for it. The van's interior swayed with each turn, tactical gear clattering softly against the walls. Through the front partition, she glimpsed familiar buildings. They were heading back to the tower, back to Kellen's command center, where this had all started. "Rest," Kellen murmured, his thumb brushing across her knuckles where their hands still touched. "You've earned it." She wanted to argue, to maintain the walls she'd built against his influence, but exhaustion dragged at her bones, and the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her felt like the only real thing in the world. So she closed her eyes, just for a moment, and let the victory settle into her muscles, like the familiar ache after a long day of training. The penthouse kitchen gleamed under soft, recessed lighting, antiseptic scents mingling with the lingering traces of gunpowder and sweat. Kala perched on the marble island, while Kellen worked with steady precision, his fingers surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the shallow cut on her forearm. "This might sting," he warned, dabbing iodine along the wound. The liquid burned, but Kala refused to flinch. She'd earned worse blisters from her bowstring. His proximity felt different now, less threatening, more charged. The adrenaline hadn't fully faded, leaving her hyper-aware of every small movement. The brush of his breath against her skin, the careful way he held her arm, the heat radiating from his body. "About the wager," Kellen said quietly, threading a sterile needle. "The terms weren't what they seemed." Kala stiffened. "You mean the part where I became your property for a month?" "Theater." He met her eyes, something raw in his expression. "We needed to flush out a leak. Your club was being used as a dead drop. We had intel, but no proof. The spectacle was meant to draw attention, force them to move." His fingers never paused in their work, placing neat stitches with surgical precision. I don't own what isn't freely given, Calla. Never have, never will. The apology wrapped in arrogance made her breath catch. She hated how it affected her, how his touch sent electricity skittering under her skin, hated even more how much she wanted to lean into it. So I was bait, she said, trying to hold on to her anger. You were unexpected. He tied off the last stitch. The skill was real. The way you handled yourself tonight, that was real. His thumb traced the edge of the bandage, lingering longer than necessary. The touch sparked something molten in her chest. Gravity took over, drawing them closer until she could count his eyelashes, see the flecks of gold in his irises. His hand slid up her arm to cup her neck, and then they were kissing, hard and desperate, tasting of adrenaline and salt. Calla's fingers curled in his shirt as he backed her against the pantry door. The cool metal pressed against her spine, a stark contrast to the heat of his body. The world narrowed to sensation, his hands spanning her waist, her pulse thundering in her ears, the slick slide of tongues and shared breath. A sharp electronic chime shattered the moment. They broke apart, both breathing heavily. Bram's voice crackled over the intercom. "Boss, we have a situation." Kellen pressed his forehead to hers for a heartbeat before stepping back. "Show me." The kitchen's hidden screens flickered to life, displaying social media feeds and news sites. Calla's stomach dropped as she read the headlines. A contract had surfaced, allegedly signed by her 3 days ago, surrendering herself into Voss service. The forgery was convincing enough to spark a frenzy. Comment sections overflowed with speculation and crude suggestions. A popular crime blogger had already posted the location of her mother's clinic, complete with visiting hours. Calla's hands clenched as she scrolled through threats, both explicit and veiled. Around them, the building's security protocols engaged with whisper, quiet efficiency. Blast shields slid over windows, electronic locks cycled, and additional guards appeared in the hallways. The protection should have been reassuring, but it felt like a cage closing around her. "Safe house," Kellen said, his earlier tenderness replaced by cold fury. "Until we trace this back to its source." "I can't hide here forever." Calla pushed away from the pantry. "My mother needs protection. Jonah's still recovering." "Already handled. Diana's team is with your mother, and Jonah's secure in medical." He caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Let me fix this. When it's over, when you're safe, you go home." "No." "Strings!" The promise rang hollow against the city lights visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Out there, her face was becoming a symbol. The girl who sold herself to a crime lord, the latest scandal for internet vultures to pick apart. The freedom she'd won with 50 perfect shots felt like ash in her mouth. "Bram's tracking the source," Kellen continued. "The forgery's good, but digital signatures leave traces. We'll find who did this." Calla nodded numbly, unable to look away from the cityscape that had turned hostile overnight. The same streets she'd walked freely yesterday now held hidden cameras and malicious intent. Her world had contracted to this gilded cage in the sky, with Kellen as both jailer and protector. Hours crawled past. Sleep proved impossible despite the luxury guest suite they'd given her. She paced the corridors instead, counting steps and security cameras, mapping exits she couldn't use. The penthouse sprawled across the tower's top floor, all gleaming surfaces and stark modernist furniture, wealth displayed in negative space. After what felt like days, but was probably only an afternoon, she found herself in an unfamiliar hallway. A door stood slightly ajar, its electronic lock dark. Bram must have forgotten to rearm it during the chaos. Curiosity drew her forward. The room beyond held display cases, their contents spotlit like museum pieces. Weapons mostly, vintage guns, ceremonial swords, the kind of collection wealth accumulated for show. But one case stopped her cold. A battered compound bow hung on velvet backing, its carbon fiber limbs, scarred but lovingly maintained. The string had been replaced recently, the serving fresh and precise. A small placard beneath it read simply, Emerson Voss. The case before her held more than a bow. It held a story of loss, written in carbon fiber and grief. Calla's fingers hovered near the glass, tracing the scarred limbs without touching. The placard's simplicity hit harder than flowery words could. Emerson Voss. He was 17. Kellen's voice came from behind her, quiet and raw. Junior champion 3 years running. Calla turned, catching the unguarded pain in his expression before he could mask it. He stood in the doorway, shoulders rigid against the memory. The ambush happened at the training center, he continued. Korshak's men knew exactly when to hit, down to the minute. They weren't after him specifically, just the shipment routes he was carrying. Wrong place, wrong time. His laugh was bitter. Except it wasn't chance. Someone fed them his schedule. The cracked bow suddenly felt like a tomb marker. A mole? Never caught them. The bow was all we recovered, damaged in the firefight. Kellen moved closer, his reflection ghosting across the display glass. I had it restored, but... He trailed off. The words stuck. But it's not the same, Calla finished softly. The piece clicked into place. Why he'd watched her at the club. Why he'd engineered that cruel spectacle. Protection through distance. She turned to face him fully. How long were you watching me before that night? Weeks. The admission seemed to cost him. Saw you practicing after hours. The precision, the focus. You reminded me of him. And then I wanted you for yourself, which made you dangerous. So you decided to be cruel instead. Make it a game. If people thought you were just another conquest, just property won on a bet, they wouldn't look closer. Wouldn't see... He cut himself off, jaw tight. Wouldn't see what, Calla pressed, stepping into his space. That wanting you makes you a target. The words spilled out like he couldn't hold them back. That every person I've ever... He stopped again, dragging a hand down his face. The vulnerability in his voice loosened something in her chest, a knot she hadn't recognized until it started to unravel. His cultivated cruelty wasn't sport. It was armor, forged in blood and loss. They stood in that raw moment, the truth hanging between them like smoke, until rapid footsteps broke the silence. Bram appeared in the doorway, folder in hand, expression grim. Boss! You need to see this. The photos inside were grainy security stills, but clear enough. Calla outside the club, apparently deep in conversation with a man she'd never seen. The timestamp showed last Tuesday night. In one shot, she seemed to be handing him a keyring. I've never met him, she said immediately. That's not... Korshak's fixer, Bram supplied. Goes by Chrome. That night, Kellen said slowly. What happened? Calla's mind raced back. A sponsor came by, said he'd heard about the wager, wanted to help. Brought a new competition quiver, insisted on installing it himself. Kept telling me to focus on my practice, not worry about equipment. Understanding hit like ice water. Gideon, she breathed. Your cousin, he was setting me up. Kellen's face went deadly still. The arrows. Show me. They rushed to the practice range where her quiver sat. Under UV light, the arrows revealed a faint chemical residue, tracking dye, designed to mark targets without their knowledge. Every shot she'd taken that night had tagged someone in the crowd, created a map of allegiances through invisible stains. He played us both, Kellen snarled. Used you to mark potential traitors, then framed you as Korshak's plant when it suited him. The council gathering that followed was chaos. Half wanted Calla locked down as a security risk. The other half argued she was clearly another of Gideon's victims. Through it all, she sat numb, watching her brief taste of freedom crumble under wheels within wheels. Helene Ward, Kellen's security chief, finally cut through the noise. The lakeside compound is secure. Send her there with her brother while we handle this internally. You mean while you handle family, Calla corrected, meeting Kellen's gaze. His expression softened fractionally. Yes. The weight of everything, the wager, the rescue, the kiss, the betrayal, pressed down on her shoulders. She'd won her freedom only to have it twisted into chains, saved her brother only to drag him deeper into danger, opened her heart only to find herself a pawn in someone else's game. Kellen crossed to her chair, bending close to speak privately. Let me fix this. Let me keep you safe while I do. And then what? She whispered. Then you choose. Stay or go. But it will be your choice, not his manipulation. The council continued arguing around them, but in that moment it was just them. The crime lord and the archer, both caught in webs they hadn't woven, both fighting for something true in a world built on lies. Bram appeared at Kellen's shoulder. Cars are ready. Helene's team is standing by. Calla nodded once, gathering her strength. She'd survived poverty, kept her family alive, made impossible shots under pressure. She could survive this too. The thought of retreat burned, but sometimes survival meant knowing when to take cover and when to stand your ground. She rose, squaring her shoulders. I'll get Jonah. Rain lashed against the safe house windows as Calla paced the loft, her footsteps matching the steady tick-tick-tick of the ancient kitchen clock. Below, frogs sang their wet chorus from the lake's edge, a sound that should have been peaceful, but only heightened her sense of exile. Helene sat at the dining table, 3 laptops open, her fingers moving with precise efficiency as she dug through Gideon's digital footprint. The blue light from the screens cast shadows under her eyes, but her focus never wavered. On the couch, Jonah slept fitfully, a baseball bat clutched to his chest like a child's stuffed animal. Every time he shifted, Callah's heart clenched. He shouldn't be here, shouldn't be wrapped up in this web of syndicate politics and deadly games. Got something, Helene murmured, as dawn crept in. Gala event next week. Supposed to be a public truce between Voss and Korshak families. Location's interesting, the old Natural History Museum. Abandoned for what, 10 years now? Calla moved to look over her shoulder. Perfect for spectacle, perfect for sabotage. Helene's mouth tightened. Guest list, security details, even the catering order. It's all too neat, too accessible. The morning light had barely warmed when gravel crunched outside. Through the window, Calla spotted a sleek black car, and then Gideon emerged, roses in hand, wearing a smile that made her skin crawl. Helene intercepted him at the door, her politeness razor-sharp. Unexpected pleasure. Family checking on family. He thrust the roses forward. For our guest of honor. Calla stayed back, watching his performance. The concerned cousin, the bearer of dire warnings. How Kellen planned to trade her to Korshak for peace. How she needed his protection instead. But Helene was better at this game. Each smooth deflection, each pointed question, made him work harder to maintain his mask. His frustration built until finally he snapped. Uncle says the black tie will be their last. Into what he thought was a private call. Helene's eyes flicked to the roses, to the tiny microphone nestled in their petals. Thunder rolled across the lake as Gideon realized his mistake. His smile turned ugly. Well, this has been lovely, but... The perimeter alarms shrieked to life. Lake exit, Helene barked, shoving a pre-packed bag into Calla's hands. Now! Jonah jerked awake as men in black tactical gear breached the tree line. Calla grabbed his arm, dragging him toward the back door, while Helene retrieved a shotgun from under the counter. But you! Calla started. I'll hold the front, go! Rain pelted them as they sprinted for the small dock. The skiff's motor caught on the second try, its purr nearly lost in the storm. Jonah huddled under a tarp, while Calla steered them into the darkness, the shore receding behind them. Through sheets of rain, she caught a final glimpse of Helene's silhouette in the doorframe, shotgun ready, standing her ground. The lake churned beneath them as Calla pushed the skiff to its limits. Every flash of lightning made her flinch, expecting to see pursuit boats. But the storm worked in their favor, hiding them in its chaos. Her hands were numb on the controls by the time they reached the opposite shore. She helped Jonah out first, then secured the boat with shaking fingers. The audio clip from Gideon's slip was already uploading to Bram, but a text wouldn't be enough. Not with everything at stake. Under a dripping pine, Calla pulled Jonah close. I need you to find somewhere safe to hole up. No way, I'm not leaving you alone. Someone has to warn Kellen, in person, before the gala. Then I'm coming with, you're my weak spot, she cut him off. They know it. I can't infiltrate anything if I'm worried about protecting you. His jaw worked, stubborn as ever. Calla, please. She pressed her forehead to his. I need to know you're safe. It's the only way I can do what needs doing. Rain trickled down their faces like tears as he finally nodded. She gave him the emergency cash from the go bag, made him memorize a contact number for one of Helene's people. 24 hours, she promised. If you don't hear from me by then, use the number. You better come back, he whispered fiercely. Always do, little brother. She forced a smile. Now go. Don't look back. She watched until his figure disappeared into the wet darkness, then pulled out her phone. The gala was less than 18 hours away. She needed formal wear, a way in, and a plan that wouldn't get her killed. Her thumb hovered over Bram's number. He'd try to stop her, but he was also the only one who could help make this work. And after everything, the wager, the rescue, Gideon's betrayal, she refused to hide while others fought her battles. The storm's fury was fading to a steady drizzle as she hit dial. Whatever came next, she'd face it on her feet, bow in hand, writing her own ending to the story. Bram answered on the first ring. Location. Safe. Mostly. But I need your help. She took a deep breath. And you're not going to like it. The service uniform itched at Calla's neck as she slipped us through the museum's back corridors. Her borrowed clothes smelled of industrial detergent, the kind that screamed, staff only. Perfect for becoming invisible. The garment bag slung over her shoulder held her bow, broken down and disguised among hangers of spare uniforms. She ghosted past kitchen staff, rushing appetizers to the main hall, memorizing each turn and doorway. The blueprints Bram had texted helped, but seeing it in person revealed the subtle details. Which hinges squeaked, which doors swung silent where the cameras had blind spots. The mechanical lift beneath the central stage drew her attention. Ancient hydraulics hummed beneath the polished wood, ready to elevate speakers for dramatic effect. She crouched in the shadows, studying its mechanisms while checking her phone's timer. 10:47 p.m. Through gaps in the temporary flooring, she glimpsed designer shoes and evening gowns swirling above. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors where Seattle's elite mingled, oblivious to the predators in their midst. The air smelled of money, expensive perfumes, aged whiskey, and that particular blend of power and privilege that made her teeth ache. At 11:15, she climbed into the rigging space above the hall, using the maintenance access Bram had marked. Her muscles remembered similar routes from theater work in high school: catwalk to lighting bridge, truss to truss. The height gave her a perfect view of the growing crowd. Kellen's arrival at 11:30 drew every eye in the room. The tuxedo transformed him from dangerous to devastating, but it was his smile that made her pause, razor-sharp and utterly false. Gideon shadowed him like a second skin, playing the devoted cousin with an actor's precision. Their small talk and champagne toasts looked genuine unless you knew where to look for the tension. She found the first shaped charge at 11:35, cleverly disguised as a lighting mount. The detonator line snaked along a truss, professional work meant to look like standard wiring. Her stomach clenched as she followed its path, finding more charges placed to bring down key structural points. With trembling fingers, she texted Bram. Charges on main support beam plus stage mast. Sending diagram. She sketched quickly, marking blast points and wire routes. The reply came instantly. Hold position. Team en route. But waiting meant death. She could see the trap clearly now. The lift would raise both Voss men for their midnight toast, triggering the charges at peak height. Maximum impact, maximum spectacle. Gideon's signature all over it. Instead of holding position, she began her hunt. The first arrow took out a detonator line near the north wall. The second severed wiring by the emergency exit. Each shot required perfect precision, cutting cables without disturbing the fixtures that concealed them. One mistake would give her away. She worked methodically, using shadows and sound cover from the string quartet below. The party swelled toward its midnight crescendo while she eliminated kill switches one by one. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the chill air in the rafters. At 11:52, she hit a problem. The final line disappeared into the housing of a massive digital projector aimed at the main wall. The machine hummed softly, prepped for what she guessed would be some meaningless montage about family and tradition, but reaching the wiring meant exposing herself to the crowd below. She watched Kellen work the room, his movements smooth but his shoulders tight. He knew something was wrong. She could read it in the way his eyes swept the shadows. But Gideon kept him engaged, steering him steadily toward the stage with practiced ease. 2 minutes, Bram's text flashed. Strike team in position. But they wouldn't reach the projector in time. She could see Gideon palming something in his pocket, likely a remote trigger as backup. His smile never wavered as he guided Kellen to the dais, champagne flute raised in preparation. Toast to family, he announced loudly enough for her to hear. And new beginnings. The lift hummed to life. Calla knocked her final arrow, exhaling slowly as she drew. The projector housing was reinforced plastic, but she knew its weak points. One shot to disable it and trigger the emergency lights. One chance to save the man who'd gambled with her life and then risked his own to save her brother. Below, Kellen's face remained perfectly composed, though she caught the tiny tell, his left hand flexing once, ready for violence. He'd figured it out too late. The clock struck midnight as Calla's fingers released the string. Her arrow flew true, shattering the projector in a spray of sparks and glass. Darkness crashed down like a wave as the power failed, swallowing screams and shattering champagne flutes. In the chaos that followed, she already had her backup arrow knocked, tracking Gideon's position by his last known location. The emergency lights would kick in within seconds. The strike team would breach on multiple fronts, but those first moments of darkness belonged to her, and she intended to use them. The emergency lights sputtered, casting weird shadows across panicked faces. Kellen moved like a ghost through the chaos, years of training crystallizing into pure instinct as he drove his shoulder into Gideon's sternum. The impact sent them both sprawling across polished marble, champagne flutes shattering beneath their weight, the expensive liquid splashing across their bodies and pooling on the floor like spilled blood. Above, Calla's muscles screamed as she swung down from the catwalk, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her boots hit the floor hard enough to jar, her teeth sending shockwaves of pain up her legs. but she was already moving, bow in hand, adrenaline numbing the discomfort. Through drifting smoke that burned her lungs with every breath, she caught a flash of motion, a guard fumbling with exposed wiring near a secondary charge, his fingers working frantically. Without hesitation, her arrow found the cable before his hands could complete the connection, the sharp twang of her bowstring barely audible above the chaos. Bram's team breached like a coordinated wave, their footsteps echoing off marble as they secured exits and neutralized Gideon's plants. Bram himself led with quiet efficiency, his face a mask of focus as he directed his men with terse hand signals and clipped commands. But Gideon himself was slippery as an eel, twisting free of Kellen's grip with unexpected strength. He scrambled up, blood trickling from his split lip in a thin crimson line as he grabbed 2 Korshak soldiers, using them as human shields. "Uncle Victor sends his regards!" Gideon's voice cracked with hysteria as he backed toward the service stairs, his eyes wild and darting. "Come alone or everyone burns! I mean it, Kellen! I'll bring it all down!" Kellen surged to his feet, his perfect tuxedo now streaked with dust and someone else's blood. His face was carved from stone as he tracked Gideon's retreat, jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped beneath his skin. He didn't even glance in Kalla's direction, focused solely on the retreating figure. The dismissal stung more than it should have, a sharp little pain in her chest that had no business being there, considering she'd infiltrated this disaster specifically to save him. Because he'd saved Jonah. Because debts mattered in her world. Nothing more. She followed at a distance as they hit the stairwell, her steps silent compared to the thunder of men running upward. The air grew thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. Ancient portraits lurked beneath dusty sheets like ghosts, their frames catching weak emergency lighting, creating the illusion of movement in the corners of her vision. Glass crunched under her boots. Someone had shot out the security cameras, the shards glittering dangerously on every step. Wind howled through gaps in the old walls, carrying the first bitter taste of rain and the promise of the storm to come. Kalla's palms were slick against her bow grip, sweat mixing with dust as she rewrapped her fingers, forcing them steady despite the tremor that threatened to betray her. Above them, a heavy metal door banged repeatedly against its frame, the harsh metallic rhythm marking their target's path to the roof. The storm hit full force as Kellen burst through the door, Kalla close behind. Rain lashed sideways in stinging sheets, soaking them instantly to the bone as lightning split the sky in jagged white forks. Far below, police sirens wailed, their red and blue lights reflecting off wet concrete and chrome. A kaleidoscope of emergency, swirling through the night. Gideon spun to face them, his designer suit plastered to his frame like a second skin, revealing the thinness beneath his carefully cultivated image. The pistol in his hand looked absurdly small against the sprawling city backdrop, but at this range it wouldn't matter. Even a child could make the shot. His aim settled on Kellen's chest with the steadiness of a man who'd imagined this moment for years, rehearsed it in dreams both waking and sleeping. "Poetic, isn't it?" Gideon had to shout over the wind, rain streaming down his face like tears he'd refused to acknowledge. The prodigal son, the faithful cousin, the final betrayal. Uncle Victor will spin such a tragic story about family loyalty, how I tried to save you but had no choice in the end. "Victor Korshak has been feeding you scraps for years," Kellen's voice cut through the storm like a blade. "Making you feel important while he used you to gut your own family. You're nothing but a tool to him." "My family?" Gideon's laugh was ugly, edged with years of festering resentment. "You mean the one that passed me over, that treated me like a performing pet while you got groomed for the throne? I was just the backup. The insurance policy they never cashed in." Rain streamed down Kalla's face in rivulets, dripping from her lashes and blurring her vision as she edged forward with careful precision, arrow nocked but not drawn. The roof tar was treacherous under her feet, slick and uneven, and one slip would end any chance of a clean shot. She could feel Kellen's awareness of her movement like a physical touch. Though he never took his eyes off Gideon, his focus absolute. "I did everything right," Gideon's composure cracked, revealing the wounded boy beneath the man's veneer. "Perfect grades, perfect manners, perfect loyalty. I smiled when they asked, spoke when spoken to, disappeared when convenient. But it was never enough because I wasn't your father's blood. So I found someone who appreciated my talents, who saw my potential." "By selling out Emerson?" Kellen's control slipped for just a moment, raw grief bleeding through his carefully constructed walls. "He was 19, Gideon. He looked up to you. He loved you like a brother." "He was collateral damage." Gideon's hand trembled slightly, water dripping from the barrel of his gun. "I didn't mean... It wasn't supposed to be him that night. He wasn't supposed to be there at all." Lightning flashed again, throwing harsh shadows across Gideon's face, illuminating every line of regret and determination etched there. In that instant, Calla saw past the polished veneer to the desperate boy underneath, so hungry for validation he'd swallowed poison and called it wine. She recognized that hunger, had lived with it through years of scraping by, of watching her mother deteriorate while bills piled up, of never being quite enough to keep their heads above water, of making choices that kept her awake at night. But she'd never fed that hunger with other people's blood, never crossed that line. The wind caught her hair, whipping it across her face in wet strands as she stepped up beside Kellen. His shoulder brushed hers, a whisper of warmth in the cold rain, the brief contact grounding her in the moment. She could feel the coiled violence in him, the need to end this, to avenge his brother's death, tension radiating from him in almost visible waves. But vengeance wouldn't heal what was broken here. It would just add another name to the list of the dead, another ghost to haunt whatever future they managed to salvage from this mess. And she hadn't climbed through this nightmare, hadn't put herself between killers just to watch more blood spill across already stained hands. "There's another way to end this," she called out, voice steady despite the storm's fury, cutting through the howling wind with conviction born of survival. The grip of her bow was solid in her hands, an anchor point in the chaos swirling around them. She'd survived her own desperate choices without becoming a monster, had found a path forward in darkness. Maybe she could help pull someone else back from that edge too, before it was too late for all of them. 5 shots! Calla called out over the howling wind. "Clay pigeons at 50 paces. Winner decides your fate, Gideon." Rain pelted the rooftop where ancient gargoyles lurked in shadows, their stone faces weathered by decades of storms like this one. Below them, the gala's chaos spilled onto rain-slicked streets, emergency lights painting everything in surreal reds and blues. Gideon's laugh was sharp and hollow. "More circus tricks, that's your solution? Afraid to lose to a carnival act?" Calla's voice carried just enough edge to bait him. She could see his ego warring with survival instinct, the need to prove himself stronger than his fear of Kellen's retribution. Kellen stood absolutely still beside her, water streaming down his face. She felt rather than saw his understanding of her strategy. Give Gideon rules, structure, a chance to save face, and his narcissism would do the rest. 5 shots each, Gideon repeated slowly. At those clay pigeons they set up for the fireworks display. His gun hand lowered slightly as greed flickered in his eyes, a chance to humiliate her publicly one last time. "Your choice," Calla said. "Die right now, or test your aim against mine." Lightning crackled overhead, illuminating the row of clay discs mounted on thin poles near the roof's edge. They'd been meant for the grand finale, each one packed with colorful powder to explode over celebrating guests. Now they waited like distant orange moons through the rain. "Ladies first," Gideon sneered, gesturing with his free hand, while keeping the pistol loosely aimed. Calla drew her first arrow in one fluid motion, factoring in the crosswind and rain. The string hummed against her cheek, familiar as breathing. She released on the exhale, sending the arrow singing through the storm. The first clay pigeon shattered in a burst of purple powder that the wind immediately shredded. Without pausing, she knocked and fired twice more in rapid succession. 2 more explosions of color painted the night. Blue, then green. "Your turn," she said quietly. Gideon's hands shook slightly as he raised the pistol. The first shot went wide, missing by several feet. His curse was lost in a thunderclap as Kellen began moving, each step measured and deadly. "Stay back!" Gideon swung the gun toward his cousin, but panic made him sloppy. His second shot cracked harmlessly into a gargoyle's weathered wing. Calla's fourth arrow found its mark, setting off a red powder burst that looked like blood in the strobing emergency lights. The distraction was all Kellen needed. He crossed the remaining distance in 2 long strides, catching Gideon's gun hand and twisting. Bone cracked. The pistol clattered across wet tar paper as Gideon howled. Calla's final arrow whispered past both men, pinning Gideon's expensive jacket sleeve to the rooftop mere inches from his throat. He went very still, feeling the arrowhead's kiss against his skin. "It's over," Kellen said, his voice carrying the weight of years of betrayal. "The evidence is already out." As if on cue, Helene's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Feeds are live, audio authentication confirmed, video of the bomb plot is trending, the forged contract has been thoroughly debunked." Bram emerged from the roof access, flanked by 2 grim-faced tactical officers. His movements were efficient as he cuffed Gideon's hands behind his back. "Federal Task Force is very interested in your connection to the Korshak weapons pipeline," he said. And that's just the start of their questions. Gideon's facade finally cracked completely. "You don't understand," he babbled as they led him away. "I had to prove. I deserved. Uncle Victor promised." His voice faded into the storm, leaving Calla and Kellen alone on the rain-lashed roof. Emergency lights painted everything in shifting shadows as sirens wailed below. The wind tore at their clothes, but neither moved. Kellen turned to her slowly, his expression stripped bare of all the masks he wore as the untouchable syndicate boss. In their place was something raw and honest that made her breath catch. "You're mine forever," he said, voice rough with certainty, then added more softly, "if you still choose me." The rain drummed around them as Calla felt the weight of that choice. Not a cage or a debt or a bargain, but a door standing open. Her fingers were still curved around her bow, the grip warm and familiar against her palm. She thought of all the targets she'd hit in her life, for money, for survival, for pride. But this shot, this choice, might be the most important one she'd ever take. The old her would have run from this moment, from the vulnerability in his eyes and the power he wielded. The old her lived in a world where love was just another word for chain. But she wasn't that person anymore. She'd changed, not because he'd changed her, but because she'd chosen to grow into someone who could stand beside power without being consumed by it. Someone who could love fiercely while remaining free. The wind caught her hair, whipping it around her face as lightning split the sky again. In that flash of clarity, she saw their future stretched out before her. Not a cage, but a partnership forged in fire and choice. Thunder rolled across the city as they stood suspended in that moment of decision. Rain washing away the last barriers between them, while far below, the lights of their city blazed against the storm's darkness. The morning sun streamed through freshly cleaned windows, catching dust motes that danced above newly varnished floors. The East Harbor Shooting Club smelled of lemon polish and fresh coffee brewing in the renovated break room. Change filled every corner, gleaming equipment racks, crisp paint, and a wall of photos showing local kids learning proper form. Jonah moved with purpose, checking lanes and setting up training bows for the morning's youth program. His confidence had grown in the weeks since the gala, shoulders straight as he arranged safety gear with the care of someone who finally felt useful. "Perfect timing," Calla called from the office. "First group arrives in 20. She emerged carrying a stack of waivers, pausing to adjust the plaque that now hung prominently near the entrance. The Emerson Voss Memorial Youth Archery Program. The brass caught the light, a reminder that some losses could fuel something meaningful. The bell chimed as Kellen entered, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray Henley. No security detail, no armored vehicles. Just him, moving through the space like he belonged there. His eyes found Calla immediately, softening at the edges in a way reserved only for her. "Thought you had meetings all morning," she said, but her smile gave away her pleasure at seeing him. "Rescheduled." He approached the counter, withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket, and set it down with deliberate care. "Because this matters more." Calla's breath caught as she stared at the box. Jonah tactfully disappeared into the equipment room, though she caught his grin before he vanished. "I'm done making wagers with your life," Kellen said quietly. "Done using you as bait or leverage. Done letting power games dictate our timing." His fingers traced the box's edge. "I want this. Want you. But only if you choose it. No enemies breathing down our necks, no deadlines, no pressure. Just us, on whatever day feels right." Calla touched the box, but didn't open it. A smile played at her lips as an idea formed. "Maybe one more wager," she said. "But this time, I set the terms." His eyebrow lifted, intrigued. "I'm listening." 50 bullseyes, like that first night. She gestured to lane 3, where it had all begun. "But this time, you stand where everyone can see you. And if I make them all, you take a mic at the reopening ceremony and tell the whole story. Why you really came here that night. Why you chose mockery over honesty, how you fell. Not as punishment, but as proof you'll wear our truth in the open." Kellen's eyes darkened with memory and want. "And if you miss, I won't." The certainty in her voice made him smile. Word spread quickly through the small group already gathered. Helene appeared from her office, tablet in hand, but forgotten as she leaned against the doorframe. Bram materialized silently near the entrance, arms crossed, but eyes watchful. Even the early arrival kids pressed against the observation window, whispering excitedly. Calla selected her bow, not the old house weapon, but the one Kellen had given her after the gala, perfectly balanced and truly hers. She rolled her shoulders, settled into her stance, and found her anchor point. The first arrow flew true, striking dead center. Then another and another, each shot accompanied by soft counting from the growing crowd. 10 became 20, became 30, the cloverleaf pattern growing tighter with each impact. Kellen stood exactly where he had that first night, but everything else had changed. Instead of mockery, his face showed naked pride. Instead of a cruel bargain, this was a choice. Instead of strangers betting on her failure, she was surrounded by people invested in her success. At 45, her arms burned, but her aim stayed steady. 46. 47. The room had gone silent except for the whisper of releases and the thunk of arrows finding home. 48. 49. On the 50th shot, Calla took an extra breath, met Kellen's eyes, and loosed. The arrow split air and buried itself in the heart of the target, completing the perfect pattern. Someone started clapping, probably Jonah, and suddenly the room filled with applause. But Calla only saw Kellen, looking thoroughly wrecked with pride and something deeper, as he accepted the microphone Helene offered. He cleared his throat, eyes locked on Calla. 2 months ago, I walked into this club and mocked a talented woman because I was afraid to admit I'd been watching her for weeks, afraid to confess that her strength and skill had already gotten under my skin. I played the arrogant boss because it was safer than admitting I was falling for someone who could match me shot for shot. His voice roughened. I learned the hard way that real power isn't about control. It's about protecting the one person you refuse to lose, even if it means letting them choose you every day. Calla crossed to him, tears blurring her vision but smile radiant. Yes, she whispered before he could ask properly. Yes to all of it. His hands shook slightly as he opened the box and slid the ring onto her finger, a delicate arrow wrapped in platinum set with tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. Bram cleared his throat suspiciously, turning away to check a perfectly functional door lock. Helene tapped rapidly on her tablet, but her smile gave away that she was already planning scholarship details rather than actually working. Outside, a line of teenagers had formed, practice bags slung over shoulders, eager to learn from the woman who never missed, and the man who had become safe harbor instead of storm. They pressed against the glass, pointing at the target with its perfect cloverleaf pattern, whispering about the legend they'd just witnessed. Inside, Calla and Kellen stood forehead to forehead in the morning light, surrounded by their chosen family while new beginnings waited just beyond the doors.